Most of us go a whole day without really thinking about it, but could we live for just 1 minute if it were gone? Hello and welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions. I'm Rebecca Felgate, and today we're asking, what if the world lost oxygen for 1 minute? There is a bit of a possible double interpretation here. What if we lost air for a minute, and what if all the oxygen molecules in the world disappeared? One would be awful, the other would be catastrophic. Because I love you and I don't believe in questions unanswered where possible, I'm going to answer both. If we lost air for a minute, there would understandably be mass panic, although panic is terrible for a lack of oxygen. The more your body panics, the more oxygen it needs, meaning you're more likely to pass out. If the oxygen went, we would need to conserve our energy. We would also really need to be indoors. Why? Well, because oxygen makes up the ozone layer and it deflects UV rays. Without it, we would have a greater risk of exposure and serious sunburn. The sky would become a lot darker, a lot like the sky towards the end of dusk. This is because there would be fewer particles in the atmosphere to scatter the blue light from the sun. The air would also lose around 21% of its pressure, making our ears pop and making us feel lightheaded. Most dramatically perhaps would be the lack of fire. Fires need oxygen to burn. This goes for internal combustion engines that's integral to cars and aeroplanes. If we lost oxygen for just 1 minute, cars and planes would literally stop working, which could be really catastrophic if you're in the sky. Of course, nothing would be as catastrophic as if we lost all oxygen molecules altogether. That would pretty much be a civilization ender. Oxygen can be found in the majority of compounds on Earth, not just in the atmosphere. Oxidization means that metals don't bleed together when they touch. Without oxygen, metals would combine, breaking multi-metal electronic devices right off the bat. Although really, that would be the very least of our worries. The Earth's crust, for example, is 47% oxygen. Without it, it would crumble and collapse in on itself, causing irreparable structural damage to the Earth's surface. This would of course cause the mother of all worldwide earthquakes, although without oxygen, everything made of concrete would have already crumbled into a dust. You know what also would be kinda dust? Yeah, us. Don't worry about choking when you inhale all of that fallen building dust. Our bodies are almost 60% water. You know what makes water? 2 particles of hydrogen and 1 particle of oxygen. Without the O in H2O, we would become bones and gassy particles. Nice. Speaking of water, say goodbye to the ocean. Without all that oxygen, the ocean would turn to hydrogen, which is a lighter element, and would begin to drift off up. Eventually, without the ozone layer, the hydrogen gases would bleed out into space, never to return. Marine life will obviously perish, although as almost all living things contain oxygen particles, they were doomed from the start. If all of the oxygen was gone, even just for 1 minute, everybody would die. Cars and planes would break down, the sky would be dark, buildings would crumble, the earth would collapse in on itself, and the oceans would evaporate, leaving a rugged shell of a land. Of course, if it were just the air we breathe, we would probably be fine. Probably. But still, doesn't this video give you a fine appreciation for that life-giving element that is oxygen? What a gaseous babe it is. Here's to you, oxygen, old pal. Never leave us. Seriously though. Thanks guys for tuning into this episode of Life's Biggest Questions. What is your favorite element in the periodic table? Aside from our mate oxygen, I'm gonna have to go with magnesium, but there is a special place in my heart for all of the noble gases. Do let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below, and heck, why not suggest what kind of video you would like us to make next?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 seconds doesn't seem like a long time. 5 seconds just passed in what feels like no time at all. But what if the world lost oxygen for 5 seconds? You might think that you could hold your breath for 5 seconds and life would go on as normal afterward. I mean, realistically, most people could hold their breath for 5 seconds. In fact, most people can hold their breath for at least 30 seconds. But if oxygen entirely disappeared for 5 seconds, that's another story. Oxygen is necessary for life on Earth as we know it. Oxygen is not only in the air we breathe, it's in the water, and it also makes up 45% of the Earth's crust. Concrete relies on oxygen. Vehicles with internal combustion engines need oxygen. There are countless ways that life would be affected if the world lost oxygen for 5 seconds. Today, Life's Biggest Questions asks, what if the world lost oxygen for 5 seconds? Hello and welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions. I'm Charlotte Dobre. If you want to connect with the creative team behind Life's Biggest Questions, check out the description for the links to our social media. And if you need a place to get your news on YouTube, you should also subscribe to our sister channel, Inform Overload. Nitrogen is the most abundant gas in the universe, but oxygen is the most most vital to us. Life as we know it could not exist without it. If the world lost oxygen in the air we breathe for 5 seconds, we likely wouldn't even notice. I mean, maybe we might think it's a bit weird when we can't take a breath, but we wouldn't die from it. The oxygen would come back after 5 seconds, and that works out to be no more than 4 breath attempts. There definitely wouldn't be mass suffocation occurring across the globe, if that's what you're picturing. But I'm not just talking about oxygen in the air. Oxygen exists all around us. If the world lost oxygen for 5 seconds, at least it would be a pretty amazing thing to witness. First, as soon as the oxygen was gone, the sky would become black. We see blue skies because of oxygen particles in the atmosphere. Without oxygen, there are fewer particles in the air, meaning fewer particles for light to bounce off of. This would result in a dark sky with an extremely bright sun, and that bright sun would be nasty as hell. While the world lost oxygen for 5 seconds, everyone outside would suffer from devastating sunburns. Without oxygen, we would have no ozone layer. The ozone layer protects us on Earth from the devastating effects of the sun, and molecular oxygen in the air also protects our skin from UV light. Anyone outside or sun tanning on a beach while the world lost oxygen gets second or even third degree sunburns. If that doesn't sound scary enough for you, 5 seconds without oxygen would result in everyone's ears exploding. Yes, your eardrum depends on oxygen. Without oxygen, there would be far less air pressure, 21% less air pressure to be exact. Whenever there's a change in pressure, people can experience barotrauma. You know when you're on an airplane and the air pressure suddenly changes and your ears pop? Yeah, like that, but it would be way worse if we lost oxygen, even for 5 seconds. In fact, people wouldn't just lose hearing or experience ear popping, eardrums would explode. 7 billion people's ears exploding simultaneously? That definitely wouldn't be pleasant. And while everyone's eardrums are exploding, they'd have to get out of the way of falling infrastructure and debris. Oxygen binds the molecules in concrete together. Without it, structures that are made out of concrete like the Hoover Dam, the Panama Canal, the Pantheon, and the Burj Khalifa would crumble and essentially be reduced to dust. And after all of this happens, millions of people will be stuck under the weight of the dust from the concrete buildings. And it's not just concrete structures that will be affected. Any untreated metal on Earth would become fused together if the world lost oxygen. Most metals have a layer of oxidation on them to prevent them from welding together. Without the oxidation layer, metals would instantly bind to each other. And if you were driving at the time that the world lost oxygen, your vehicle would come to a standstill while you cry from the pain of your exploding ears. Vehicles that have internal combustion engines rely on oxygen to function. Without oxygen, they would simply stop working. Without oxygen, there can't be fire, and without fire, there's no way for engines to burn fuel, which allows them to start or keep running. While every fire on Earth simultaneously went out, cars across the globe would stop in their tracks. Every car that wasn't an electric car would be affected. This wouldn't be so bad for the people on the ground. But what about airplanes? There's an average of 100,000 flights every single day. Thousands take place every hour. In the event that the Earth lost oxygen for 5 seconds, the thousands of airplanes and helicopters that were flying at the time would fall from the sky and hit the ground. Some of these airplanes might be able to glide for 5 seconds, but many would drop like flies, instantly killing those aboard the plane and also those who were unfortunate enough to be underneath them when they crashed. But honestly, planes wouldn't have anything to crash into in the first place because the ground on Earth would crumble if the world lost oxygen for 5 seconds. Oh yeah, I forgot that little detail. Maybe I should have led with that, but whatever, we're talking about it now. Oxygen makes up 45% of the Earth's crust. Without it, the ground below us would crumble, and we would all free fall into the Earth's core. And let's not forget water, good old H2O. Water is made up of 1/3 oxygen. Without oxygen in a water molecule, there's only hydrogen. When oxygen is removed from a water molecule, hydrogen turns into gas and expands in volume. Water makes up around 71% of the Earth's surface. Oceans hold around 96.5% of the Earth's water. Without oxygen, every body of water would essentially evaporate instantaneously, and without an ozone layer, hydrogen would float up into space. All of this wouldn't necessarily suck that much because it's not like we would be alive when it happens. Human beings are also made up of mostly water. Human beings and other living things would essentially vaporize without the presence of oxygen, even for 5 seconds. Essentially, without oxygen, our world would be an extremely dry, hot place. Thankfully, there is no way that this would ever happen. At least, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't. But it's fun to think about now, isn't it?
Hello and welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions. I'm Ron Mackenzie Lafergie. Oxygen. The 8th element of the periodic table, creator of ozone, protector of the world, the only thing standing between our fragile existence and a dark, eternal slumber. Where was I? Right, oxygen. Oxygen is pretty darn important to us living things who breathe the stuff, so we're pretty dependent on it. But what if half of it up and disappeared one day? How might this affect humanity and the world as we know it? Let's explore. If you'd like to hear more wacky hypotheticals, check out our biggest What Ifs playlist on the channel. But for now, take a deep breath because it's time to ask the question: what if Earth lost 50% of its oxygen? There are a couple different ways in which this question could be read. First, it could be referring to the oxygen atom, which is found in pretty much everything, including the human body. This would be pretty devastating. If 50% of all oxygen atoms went away, we would die, animals would die, the ozone would go to crap, a bunch of water would turn into hydrogen gas. It would not go well, and frankly would make for a pretty short video. So for this video, we'll focus on what would happen if 50% of the oxygen gas, or O2, disappeared. Sound good? Good, let's rock. Currently, 21% of the gas found in our atmosphere is oxygen, the second most prevalent gas after nitrogen. For the record, that's 2 quintillion pounds of oxygen. That's 2 with 18 zeros after it. Yikes. However, if we suddenly lost half the oxygen, we'd be down to a measly 1 quintillion, which, okay, still sounds like a ridiculous amount, but it's still a lot less. So what would this mean for the world? Well, the good news is we would still be able to breathe. First of all, there is a significant reserve of oxygen on Earth that's just chilling out, waiting to be breathed in. There are plenty of microorganisms that don't use oxygen at all, and there's a significant reserve in the ocean. Plus, as we all know from studying the carbon cycle in school, plants would still be around, taking in that gross CO2 and spitting out the sweet O2. All this means that there is plenty of oxygen around to keep us breathing for quite some time. In time, setting all other factors aside, oxygen levels would likely increase, just as they did the first time around. But what about the ozone layer? That's something I'm vaguely aware of thanks to Al Gore. Well, since we're talking about oxygen gas, or O2, this means that the ozone layer made up of O3 molecules will not be directly affected. However, that doesn't mean the ozone layer will remain unchanged. See, ozone is produced in the stratosphere, the second closest atmospheric layer to the Earth's surface. When solar radiation strikes oxygen gas molecules, or O2, it can split the two atoms apart, and when these single oxygen atoms collide with another O2 molecule, they merge to become an O3 molecule. Why am I telling you this? Well, if there is less O2 in the atmosphere, then there will be fewer oxygen gas molecules to be split by the solar radiation. This means that by halving the amount of O2, you will also be reducing the amount of O3, or ozone, in the atmosphere. But hey, you might be thinking, who gives a gosh darn about the dumb ozone layer? I mean, you might use more colorful language, but come on, this is YouTube. To which I would respond, well, hey, you silly Willy. The ozone layer is super important. You see, the layer of ozone around the Earth helps to protect all of us organisms from harmful UV radiation. Currently, it manages pretty well. Sure, we still get sunburns and skin cancer, but this is relatively rare. But with less ozone in the atmosphere, these problems would be exacerbated greatly. However, it should be noted that even if the ozone layer was half as thick, it would still be thick enough to protect us from the lethal UV radiation. Thankfully, over billions of years, the ozone layer has thickened considerably. Just 600 million years ago, there was only 10% as much oxygen in the atmosphere as there is today. So going down to half will still be better than that. This leaves us with a bit of breathing room. But just because it won't kill us directly, that doesn't mean it won't affect us. With half of our current protection against UV rays, related diseases such as skin cancer would skyrocket. We've seen this to a lesser extent on a much smaller scale today, with the hole in the ozone layer over Antarctica affecting more and more areas. But the hole is still relatively small. If we lost half of the ozone, it could become a much more worldwide problem. Local and systemic immunosuppression rates would go up, and malignant melanoma caused by indirect DNA damage from UVA radiation would cause countless deaths. Cataracts and other vision issues would also become far more common. This would mean that going outside unprotected would become much more dangerous than it is today. Gone would be the days of basking on the beach mostly nude. You'd want to be covered at all times, which would be pretty rough in humid climates. Sunglasses would be essential in pretty much every situation as well, and society would likely move indoors even more than we already have. Of course, it's totally possible that this sudden drop-off of oxygen would have sudden, devastating effects of its own. The vacuum created by the sudden loss of matter could pose significant problems, and the delicate balance achieved over millennia could be thrown off, to the point where our atmosphere failed to function properly. However, I have neither the time nor the scientific expertise to really delve into those possibilities right now. If you'd like to learn more, Google is your friend. And now we return to our question, what if Earth lost 50% of its oxygen? Well, While we'd still be able to breathe, the changes to the ozone layer would result in a host of negative effects due to increased UV radiation. These effects would likely cause a shift in society, at minimum changing how we act and dress outside, and at worst, causing us to avoid going outdoors whenever possible. Bottom line, oxygen is important. Yeah, mind-blowing, I know.
Hey guys, how's it going? I'm your host, Jared Bronstein, and welcome to Life's Biggest Questions. This is your first time checking out our channel. Let me be the first to welcome you. Welcome. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and click that bell so you guys never miss a video. Give this video a good old thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and share it with a friend to let them know what happens if you were to lose oxygen for an hour. Of course, if you're returning to our channel, welcome back, thanks for tuning in, and as always, drop us some comments below with other videos you'd like to see on here. Today we'll be looking at what would happen if we lost oxygen for an hour. I can tell you right now, it's a bad look for everyone and everything. Humans, buildings, animals, the earth. It would be a bad time all around. Let's figure out why. Well, for starters, obviously we need oxygen to breathe. Most humans can only go so long without it. If you're lucky, maybe you can go a minute, some even longer. But no one, and I mean absolutely no one, can live without oxygen for an hour. Meaning, inevitably, we'd all die without oxygen for an hour. No surprise there, right guys? Welcome to LVQ. I'm kidding. Not really. But that's not all. Aside from us pretty much choking to death, even though we'd lose consciousness before we died, technically, our ears would also pop. And by pop, I mean explode. It would hurt a lot. You know when you go on an airplane or take an elevator down from the 50th floor and sometimes your ears feel clogged in a sense? That's because of the change in air pressure. If we lost all oxygen, we would lose approximately 21% of the air pressure instantly, and our ears would not be able to adjust to that very quickly, meaning they'd pretty much explode. Very, very painful. Now, while all of this is going on, our skin would also be burning to a crisp. This is because oxygen actually makes up the ozone, which blocks out some of the UV rays. Think of it this way. On a very sunny day without any sunscreen, you can still get a pretty bad burn. Imagine that times 100. Our ozone absorbs more than 99% of UVC rays, 90% of the UVB rays, and 50% of UVA rays. If we didn't have anything blocking us from those rays, in this case the ozone, which is made up of oxygen, the sun would absolutely burn us alive. But between the bad sunburn and our ears popping, we'd only be in pain maybe for 30 seconds. Albeit the most excruciating pain, most of us will lose consciousness from the lack of oxygen. That is, if we don't lose consciousness from the pain we're already enduring. Then again, with such a sudden drop in oxygen, our bodies would probably go into shock. All of our cells would die. So our death could also possibly be instantaneous. Isn't this fun, guys? Well, guess what? There's plenty more to cover. All of the skies will most likely turn black. Not due to clouds, but because there would be fewer oxygen molecules spread out through light. So we'd still get burnt alive, even though the sky would most likely be completely black. If that's not scary enough for you, all planes, cars, really anything with an engine would stop working as well. It can't burn fuel, therefore, down they go. Between the cars suddenly stopping, planes falling out of the black sky, us having the inside of our ears burst, and of course being burnt alive, surely that would be the end of it, right? What a joke. No chance, it gets way worse, guys. Way worse. Anything made up of concrete would pretty much turn to dust. As in almost every building, the sidewalks, floors, bridges, you get the idea. Just gone. This is due to the fact that oxygen binds concrete structures together. Speaking of binding, any metals in contact would instantly become welded to each other. Normally metal is coated in a layer of oxidation, but without oxygen the metal would immediately weld together. So between the buildings crumbling to dust, planes falling from the sky, the sun, it's quite evident we need oxygen. I think it goes without saying that any living thing, plants, animals, obviously humans, really anything that thrives off of oxygen would die as well. From your dog to the squirrel running across the street, which I guess wouldn't exist anymore because the whole concrete dust thing, all animals would unfortunately have a grim fate. But what about the fish in the ocean? Or any creature living in the ocean? Surely they'd be okay, right? Come on guys, what do you think this is? Life's happiest endings? You're watching Life's Biggest Questions, so you know damn well what happens to all the fish. They die. That's because the oceans would also evaporate. Talk about a rough day. Then again, none of the above would really matter all that much when all is said and done. The Earth's crust and mantle is made up of about 45% oxygen. Without any oxygen, the Earth would pretty much invert in itself. The entire ground would turn to dust, but then there's that molten core that would probably kill us. Kinda like a real-life hell. Well, we can't say for sure if we'd go straight down, but there would be catastrophic earthquakes happening from the entire Earth's core shifting in different ways. So all in all, no oxygen for even 10 seconds would destroy our planet. If we lost oxygen for an hour, it would have the exact same effects. Our planet would most likely cease to exist if it lost oxygen for an hour. Although, if you had an electric car, you would still be able to drive because Its engine doesn't rely on an internal combustion the way airplanes and cars that burn gas do. It uses electricity instead, which will still work. So I guess Elon Musk is onto something here, guys. Maybe he knows something we don't. In case you guys can't tell, I'm kidding. Having an electric car wouldn't make a difference. You'd still die.
Oxygen, life giver. Aside from a small number of bacteria and some single-celled species, all life on planet Earth needs oxygen. But what if that oxygen was under threat? Hello and welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions, the channel that looks to answer all manner of queries from science to science fiction, from popular culture to horror fiction and history. I'm your host Rebecca Felgate, and today I'm asking, what if the oxygen expired? Before we breeze on into this video, I want to ask you guys, wait for it, I want to know what your favourite element of the periodic table is. Yes, what a question. I feel like that question is not asked enough, but if it were asked of me, I would say without hesitation neon, obviously. Let me know your periodic thoughts in the comments section down below. Also, please do like this video and share it with a friend. If you want to read more about the topic, then our sources are linked in the description box, and you can also find links to the people that went into making this video. So what if oxygen expired? Well, let's clear a few things up. Oxygen doesn't expire. An oxygen particle is very stable, it remains an oxygen particle. Yes, it can change states like other elements. Oxygen can freeze, but it has such a low melting point that it isn't really relevant. For the sake of teaching you something new today, I will tell you though. Oxygen freezes at minus 250 degrees Celsius or minus 355 degrees Fahrenheit. Those temperatures are not experienced anywhere on planet Earth. They never have been and likely never will be. If we are talking about oxygen as a breathable gas, that doesn't expire either. Breathable oxygen, O2, is stored for medical purposes and it does not go off. A tank of oxygen from World War II would still be just as effective today. Good, so we don't have to worry about oxygen then. Well, no, not exactly. Here's the thing, our atmosphere is leaking oxygen. Atmospheric escape is the name given to the loss of atmospheric gases into outer space. Basically, oxygen is moving away from planet Earth and into the bounds of the universe. Our atmosphere is leaking at 5 times 10 to the power of 25 molecules per second. You do the math. I can't. I'm busy. At that rate, it will be billions of years before it's all gone, but we are also using up more oxygen than ever. It seems that by analysing air bubbles trapped inside ice in Greenland and Antarctica, our oxygen levels have dropped by 0.7% in the last 800,000 years. In fact, back when life was really starting to, come to life around 300 million years ago, there was significantly more oxygen in the air than there is now. Air isn't just oxygen, it's made up of a number of things. Oxygen is what allows us to function, but air contains just 20.95% of it. There is also 0.04% carbon dioxide, 0.93% argon, and 78.09% nitrogen in the air. Back in prehistoric times, there was between 30 to 35% oxygen in the air depending on what period you're focusing on. This means that animals living today are living with around 14% less oxygen than the first animals. Could we survive with 14% less oxygen than there is today? In short, no. Humans need a minimum oxygen concentration of 19.5% to stay healthy. When oxygen concentrations drop from 19.5 to 16% and you engage in physical activity, you do some exercise, you go for a run, you pop out to the gym, you engage in any kind of physical activity, at this point, your cell will fail to receive the oxygen needed to work properly. Mental functions will become impaired and respiration intermittent at oxygen concentrations that drop from 10 to 14%. At these levels, with any amount of physical activity, the body would be absolutely exhausted. With oxygen levels much lower than 14%, humans will really struggle to stay alive and healthy. We will officially become oxygen starved and die with levels that are 6% or lower. So basically, as oxygen seeps away, we and other animal life would die out. In fact, we likely would be some of the last to go because of our efficient lung capacity. The worst thing that we could do, the worst, would be panic, because panicking consumes more oxygen than ever. It consumes oxygen at a very high rate. Although on a grander scale, actually, whatever, never mind, panicking won't change things anyway. We will continue to leak oxygen, but it will take a few million years for us to even begin to feel the effects, and then a few million more before it starts to impact our health significantly. In that time, it's likely that humans would adapt, or something better suited towards the new environment will evolve. You may may remember the video I did about that big dragonfly that lived in prehistoric times, the Meganeuropsis. Well, back then there was over 30% oxygen in the atmosphere. It couldn't live today. Humans are pretty persistent, I'll give us that. Perhaps we would fight to stay alive, and perhaps we would actually eventually start absorbing oxygen in a different way. Perhaps we would actually start needing less. Could we manufacture breathable air as an option? Well, right now that is pretty hard. We could try and mine oxygen from the earth because actually it's pretty abundant. If we look beyond oxygen as a gas, it's one of the most abundant chemical elements on our planet. It's plentiful in the ocean, obviously. Water is 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. On top of that, about 1/2 of the Earth's crust is made up of chemical compounds containing oxygen. Right now, hydrogen and oxygen can be separated by passing an electric current through water and collecting the 2 gases as they bubble off, but this uses a lot of electricity and we don't have the resources. Also, we need O2 to breathe. Interestingly, it is theorized that for the first few billion years of its life, Earth's atmosphere didn't actually have any oxygen at all. Scientists believe that tiny algae called cyanobacteria evolved and triggered a very quick rise in oxygen levels. Perhaps we can encourage the growth of algae to gain more oxygen, but then too much algae is bad too. It's a fine line. Earth's losses of atmospheric gas is just another way that our planet is changing, and ultimately, planetary forces and cosmic sway is a much bigger force than human intervention. Ebb and flow is natural order. That being said, we really don't need to worry about the loss of oxygen right now. Like I said, it will be millions of years before it becomes an issue, and we have no idea what the future of planet Earth might look like at that time. There are other more pressing matters threatening human survival right now, like nuclear war for example.